Well, many people around here know you're our CEO here as Joe or Archbishop or His Excellency. You may not know this title, and that is, he's my Metropolitan. Isn't that extraordinarily sophisticated sounding? He's the least metropolitan I've ever met. He's such a breath of fresh air. Let's give it up for our Archbishop here, huh? Well, Mickey, you know, you can get a job at Notre Dame Development any day of the week. Let me tell you, really, Gina, thank you so much for inviting me to. Thanks all of you for being here tonight. You know, when Pope Francis visited Our Lady Queen of Angels School in East Harlem about a month ago, some people perhaps viewed this moment as a sort of pilgrimage, maybe a nod to a relic that is Catholic schooling in the United States. But that would be to misunderstand Pope Francis, his ministry to us, and the significance of his visit to that school in East Harlem. Francis' visit to Our Lady Queen of Angels was no empty gesture. It was an invitation to each one of us here tonight, calling us to go out into the world as you have, to the periphery as the beautiful sisters who we've recognized tonight have, and the teachers who are present here tonight have, and bring life and hope to the people who know it. Nothing in American Catholicism, nothing, offers a more vivid testament of this mindset than our Catholic schools, which have served and continue to serve as indispensable instruments of human formation and really social transformation. Well, obviously, it's an honor for us to be here tonight. I say us because a number of my colleagues from Notre Dame are here to celebrate the apostolate of Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. And it's really exciting, as you've already shared, to celebrate and to recognize with fellow Hoosiers, because our state has really become the leading tip of the spear in the education choice movement with the nation's first statewide voucher program. I know I'm among friends here who believe fully that Catholic schools are absolutely indispensable for our children, our communities, and our nation. I'd like to invite you to call to mind for just a moment our forebearers in this enterprise. These are the often unrecognized folks who might be viewed as the earliest education reformers in America. And that's a group of religious women who we've already recognized. Over the subsequent century, these religious women and men built, led, and taught in a network of schools across the United States that grew to include more than 12,500 schools, educating over 5 million students. The lives of these women and men constituted a living endowment and made this educational apostolate possible. Their work was bolstered and continued until today by the efforts of others in our community across the land, parents, community leaders, neighbors, and friends. These schools were built mainly by European immigrants who, in the immemorable words of Mayor Ed Koch, were upon arrival in Manhattan welcomed by two women. He said, Lady Liberty and Mother Church. They built schools where they grew in learning and character. The two went hand in hand, learning and character. The values transmitted in the schoolroom form the foundation of citizenship, mobility, and a life of faith. Sometimes it's interesting when you're thinking about the value of something to think about what our life would be like without it. What would be different in America today, in our church, in our communities, if Catholic schools never existed? While state-run schools have historically been lauded as beacons of civic education and linchpins in their neighborhoods, and in some cases they have been, Catholic schools have provided these benefits for their surrounding communities a fortiori. It's been shown that when Catholic schools close in an urban neighborhood, and the author of that Chicago Press book is here with me tonight, Professor Nicole Garnett, when a Catholic school closes in an urban neighborhood, crime increases, delinquency rises, urban decay sets in. Note well, what Garnett argues and demonstrates is that Catholic school closures are not merely a symptom of urban decay, they're a cause. Catholic schools represent islands of hope in the midst of lives often bereft of hope, generating untold social capital. It's past time to dispel once and for all the notion that America's Catholic schools contribute to civic and social balkanization. In fact, graduates from Catholic schools are empirically, demonstrably more likely than state-run schools to know civics, to vote and be civically engaged. Our graduates are more likely to be engaged in community service as adults. They're far less likely to be incarcerated, and they experience far higher lifetime earning. Moreover, and in contrast to the storyline popular with some politicians, in the aggregate, Catholic schools are in fact more racially and more socially plural than their public school counterparts. In fact, in many of our poorest urban communities, as you heard tonight, more than 90% of our students are minorities, and many of them are not Catholic. I hate to say it, but the ugly truth is that America's state-run schools are among the most socially, economically, and racially segregated institutions in our country, powerfully systematically reinforcing inequality of opportunity for the children of generation after generation of our nation's poorest and most at-risk population. Talk about balkanization. The truth of the matter is that Catholic schools are absolutely essential, sacred places serving civic purposes. Their existence and vitality are essential to the life and health of our nation. And if that's true of our civil society, then what of our American church if Catholic schools had never existed? We know from our research that Catholic school graduates are more likely to pray regularly, attend church regularly, retain their Catholic faith as adults, be more generous over time to the church and civil society. Let me tell you about a recent survey of students at Notre Dame. We found that fully 91% of our students who came from a Catholic school background agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that they were well educated in their faith. Contrast that with, at Notre Dame, 34% of our public school graduates would claim the same. That's a hell of a difference. Among millennials, the challenge we have in passing on the faith is steep. Did you know that Catholic school graduates are 6 times more likely to attend church regularly than their public school graduates? Did you know that Catholic school graduates are more than twice as likely to become priests or religious than public school graduates? Now look, this is not meant to be a knock on our traditional public or charter schools. We need great schools across the board, traditional public, charter, faith-based. But the distinctive contributions of our Catholic schools to our communities, our country, and our church deserve more public recognition and celebration. It's past time to rid ourselves of what Dolan calls our hospice mentality. We've got to get out the black bunting and passively mourn inevitable loss of school after schools. Catholic schools are not and must not be a vestige of a bygone past, but rather are on the cusp of a renaissance, and I want to argue that tonight. Sure, we face strong headwinds, But we face strong headwinds in building and sustaining this critically important work of the gospel ever since Elizabeth Ann Seton opened the doors of St. Joseph Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, over 200 years ago. Can we really look at each other tonight and claim that we have less resources at our disposal as a community than our grandparents and great-grandparents who came to this amazing country, often as immigrants, to build a better way of life for their families, their children and their grandchildren, ourselves? How they sacrificed to build this unique and extraordinary system of schools to offer their children a path to educational excellence in the context of our Catholic faith and values. Are we really honoring their great legacy with resignation and a hospice mentality? Of course not. That's why we're here. Tonight, I will argue briefly that it's time to understand that this isn't an obituary, it's a renaissance. While it's true that schools are still closing in some places, in many other places we're seeing new Catholic schools open, enrollment increasing. From North Carolina, obviously right here in Indiana, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Catholic schools across the country provide remarkable, often transformative education, mostly on shoestring budgets. Does it matter to anyone, as our city and state budgets are faced with unprecedented budget deficits and unmet fiscal obligations, that traditional public schools across America spend an average of $13,000 per student, while Catholic schools spend an average of half that amount with better results? Does it matter to anyone? In fact, in some cases, the figure for public schools in some major urban centers is closer to $20,000 per student. And God knows that money doesn't go to the education of our children. Much of it goes to pay for bloated bureaucracies. Does it matter to anyone that Catholic schools save the public purse in our country more than $21 billion a year? But apologies, I'm preaching to the choir. Catholic schools here in Indianapolis are providing a high-quality education for nearly 24,000 students, as we saw. You are providing thousands of children what we call the Catholic school advantage. What's the Catholic school advantage? It's what research has demonstrated time and time again. The more disadvantaged the student, the greater the increase in achievement and attainment for the student enrolled in a Catholic school. The combination of a college and heaven-focused community within a school culture of high expectations that inspires hard work and internal motivation is a game changer for students, especially minority students and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. As we all know, the Latino community is the fastest growing population in the United States. And although 68% of practicing Catholics under the age of 35 are Latino, only 3% of Latino families send their children to Catholic schools. These data present us with an unprecedented challenge as a church, but an unprecedented and vast opportunity. Nowhere has the Catholic school advantage been demonstrated to bear more fruit than in minority communities such as the Latino community, where attendance leads to a 42% greater chance of graduating from high school and a 250% chance greater to graduate from college. These outcomes also bear true for our African American students, who I might add are 25% more likely to attend a Catholic school than Latino families. There's a problem there that we need to understand better. Our schools need to be more welcoming and more inclusive. With parents in urban areas, when they are asked, what is the single most important factor when choosing a school, they most often say they want a place for their children to be safe. Well, Catholic schools provide that safe place. But we also grant children the opportunity to flourish academically, socially, and most importantly, to grow to experience themselves as children of God. Here in Indianapolis, Catholic schools are indeed providing the Catholic school advantage for your students. You saw the data. 90% of students in Indianapolis Catholic high schools will graduate on time. 94% will go on to higher education. Let's give it up for the Archdiocesan school teachers. Can I ask you to stand? And Gina Fleming, can I ask you please to stand and be recognized? Woo! My friends, let me tell you something. The conventional wisdom is flat wrong. For one thing, neither the people in this room nor we in the Alliance for Catholic Education are willing to see a country comprised of only state-run schools. First of all, their record doesn't deserve that kind of over-monopoly on the education of our family and our children. They just don't deserve that kind of monopoly. But more importantly, a state-run school monopoly would be bad for our country's civil society and indeed dangerous for the tradition of pluralism and tolerance that made our country great. At Notre Dame's Catholic Alliance for Catholic Education, we're busily engaged in an effort to provide dozens of solutions to what is certainly America's greatest civic challenge, ensuring that every American child, especially the most vulnerable, has an opportunity for a quality education. Now, there's no silver bullet to answer the pressing challenges that our education sector and Catholic schools face. But perhaps there's a collection of 1, 2, 3, 10% solutions that will ensure a high-quality education for every child in this country. We are so thrilled to join the Archdiocese here, Marian University, the University of Dayton, and other partners to take up the challenge in the Archdiocese of strengthening and expanding the great work of Catholic schools here in Indianapolis. We're grateful to Archbishop Tobin for the invitation to send a cohort of our ACE teaching fellows here, because let's face it, we know darn little about what ensures a child's quality education. We know very little. It's probably not curriculum. It's probably not class size. It's probably not teacher salaries. But I can tell you one thing. It's about great teachers and more of them. And who hires great teachers? Principals. It's about great teachers, more of them, and principals who have the intellect and the courage to hire them. Well, we're excited about joining the adventure here and trying to make a small contribution to those goals. Let me tell you about an exciting opportunity that we've been invited to explore here. I cannot tell you how grateful and excited we are to begin a new journey with the Archdiocese beginning in the fall of next year with our Notre Dame ACE Academies. These are university school partnerships that's aimed at creating high-performing proof points. We're not looking for 100 schools or 200 schools or 50 schools. We're looking for a small number of proof points for what's possible with Catholic schools serving at-risk urban children. Our first school opened in Tucson, Arizona in 2010. At that time, the doors of St. John the Evangelist School were on the verge of being permanently closed. Enrollment had been dropping precipitously for years, and less than 1/3 of our third graders were reading and doing math at grade level. That, frankly, was no better than the public school counterparts down the street. That year, to keep the school from closing, the teachers and administrators voluntarily adopted a 10% pay cut across the board. 10% of nothing. Amidst this vulnerability, however, there was a school community totally committed to doing whatever it took. Pastors, parents, teachers, and community leaders got together. We formed a partnership. Today, 5 years later, instead of failing reading and math, more than 2/3 of our kids are now performing above grade level. Our kindergartners at St. John the Evangelist are doing math in the top 15% of the country. They're reading in the top 10%. This school is located, as the schools are Notre Dame Ace Academies in South Tucson, in a 6th poorest zip code in America. Our first graders are reading in the 92nd percentile. They'll never know what the achievement gap was all about. Meanwhile, enrollment at that school has almost tripled, from 130 students to 350, and every one of our schools has a waiting list. So look, we've opened Notre Dame Ace Academies, 8 of them over the past 5 years, in Tucson, Tampa, and Orlando, and we're coming to Indianapolis if you'll have us, and we're so excited about it. We're firmly convinced that they represent precisely the type of renaissance that is so desperately needed. So now I'm on the line to produce those results, but you have to give us 5 years. Parental choice is a crucial component of our model. Parental choice isn't about saving a struggling faith-based school system, by the way, no matter how valuable. It's not about advancing a free market in education, nor even, I dare say, improving student achievement. Though each of these are valuable, at the very heart of this movement is a very basic issue of social justice, of human dignity. As I close, let's think for a moment about the appalling dearth of choices that most families on the margins of our society really have. Choices about where to live, what to eat, choices that you and I take for granted every day of our lives. Now consider whether there is any choice more utterly inalienable for parents, regardless of their social, economic, or creed, where and how their children are to be formed. Unfortunately, we in this country have developed an educational system that has systematically stripped marginalized families of this very choice. We give these families no say in where their children are educated, other than the zip code where they can afford to buy a house, and in so doing, strip them of their birthright. And this is among our greatest national shame. One of the most sacred promises we make as a republic to each one of our citizens is that each one of our children is invited to do whatever it takes to ensure that we have greater access to more outstanding educational opportunities than our parents did. We should be utterly fearless in the effort to make good on that promise. How do we do this in this room? How do we participate in the renaissance that's happening in Catholic schools? Let me just close by a couple ideas. First, believe, as Mickey, you said. Believe and share the story of good news that is Catholic schooling. The Catholic school advantage that can truly change the lives of hundreds of thousands of children across our nation and right here in our state's capital. Support your local Catholic school. Serve on their boards. Help with their business and governance challenges. Continue to fund scholarships for children to attend these schools. Insist on the right of every child to have a great teacher and a great school. And especially, continue to be advocates for school choice. You know, across the United States today, 26 states and the District of Columbia have passed private school choice laws, and the footprint grows every single day. Thank God. It will only continue to allow our educators to revolutionize the Catholic schools we hold dear. Be credible witnesses of the possible. Demonstrate that parents and families are the first and best teachers of their children. This is the belief upon which our children was founded: personal liberty, individuals having the right to make choices for themselves and their families. Let's let people make a choice about the most fundamental element of their children's lives and not consign them to a failing school based on a zip code. This is what our social teachings of the Catholic Church teach us. This is what social justice demands. It's an honor to have been with you tonight and celebrate with you all the gift of Catholic education, arguably
Never before have we as a community had the opportunity we have right here in Indianapolis to build the highest performing faith-based schools we've ever known, and to ensure that every child across this state has the opportunity to receive the education that will enable him or her to realize the American dream. So thank you, God bless you, and if you'll permit, go Irish.